Hello. Today I'll be talking about the histories and I guess you'd say innovation behind the creations of Ford, Dodge cars and Rolls-Royce cars. Just find somewhere comfy and just start listening. Henry Ford, an esteemed engineer and esteemed businessman, found himself in a predicament to where he was too scared to sell his cars and too scared to really do anything with his version of the Model A, which was seen as arbitrary and honestly not useful. People in the Midwest and the West relied heavily on horses. They did not care for cars. Here's an example of basically what you would ask someone in the West if they wanted a car, and this is what their response would be. Sir, what would you feel like if you had a car? Would you feel esteemed? Would you feel like it would be useful? I'll tell you, Sonny, honestly, I think a car is stupid. Your automobiles that you make are not even useful at all. In fact, I would rather just stay with my horse because I don't have enough money to actually pay for a car. And honestly, a horse does me better. A horse loves me, and a horse is a companion, unlike your silly automobiles. Now, if you were to ask people today if they'd have a car or a horse in terms of usefulness, everyone's going to say a car. That wasn't the case back then. Its usefulness wasn't even proved until an actual natural disaster happened. For instance, people didn't really care about the Model A that Ford made. Ford thought this was an incredible invention. Well, sorta. He was a huge, I guess you could say, perfectionist freak. He had to have everything perfect. If it weren't for his co-businessman, the Model T would have never been released because he was too scared of it being non-perfect. But the Model A found itself extremely useful after the San Francisco earthquake in California. The Model A was actually used to clean debris, help save lives, and move people around the city in order to get to hospitals and other types of medication. Henry Ford proved himself. He found himself in an incredible position to seriously make a profit, to seriously bank off of this huge publicity he just got from in his opinion, his worst car he's ever made, to being deemed as useful. So he went right back to the lab and decided, you know what, the Model A wasn't that good, and he wanted to make an affordable car that the everyday man could buy. So that's when he got his inspiration for the infamous Model T. The Model T was extremely light, only weighing 1,200 pounds, and its engine block was made out of one piece of metal, which was unlike any engine ever made before. Another huge thing about the Model T is its steering, instead of being on the right side, because everyone was used to being a train conductor, and that's just how things were back then. His steering wheel was on the left side, and this would prove to be a game changer for cars, especially in America. Now in Europe, they kept it on the right side. They felt that that's how it should be. It started that way, it should stay that way. Henry ended up making it the permanent way in America. Henry Ford, now, there's one little mistake he did. He relished in his own satisfactory, and he didn't really give too much credit to those around him. For instance, James Couzens actually helped Ford make this, which was added onto the Model T. The magneto flywheel was introduced and built onto the Model T, and it was built to let the car go on the farm roads, which was what Ford's main goal was to give the car to the American farmer, to the poor businessman, to anyone who might need an automobile that, hasn't really been to the city and hasn't really gotten to experience that stuff. I mean, the introduction of this was revolutionary. It made it to where rural families can go to the hospital now, or go to the city that they've always wanted to go to, or get a loan at a bank, or anything, really. And funny enough, it actually caused a sexual revolution. Dates happen in cars now. Babies were made in cars now, which Whoa. But aside from that, the reason that the Model T was so revolutionary is it started at a price of $890 in 1908 and down to only $490 in 1916, almost halving the price in only 8 years. And it would still go down a little bit the further you went. Around 1920, I think it was $430, something like that. It was absolutely insane what Ford was doing, but it was genius. Now, the way he made these cars was his very, very famous assembly line, which, believe it or not, like he did with the magneto flywheel, he took that idea. He took that idea from none other than Danish immigrant Charles Sorensen, who actually had a rope pull a Model T, and workers would place stuff on it. And then Ford got with him and started modifying the assembly line, and ended up making it his own invention and claiming it all for himself. Kind of a D-bag move. Just a heads up, he's a real D-bag in all of history. Not a great guy. But this assembly line proved to be a genius development. I mean, to make a car, just any Model T, it took only 93 minutes for an entire car to be built, which is unheard of at this time. Usually it would take 12 hours of skilled craftsmen going through and picking apart each little part, building everything. But with the way that the assembly line worked, you'd have one person for bolts, one person for nuts, one person for an engine block, and they would just assemble, and they would put in their little parts, and employees actually hated doing this. They absolutely hated it. So Ford, being the smart man that he is, moved the minimum wage per day from $2.34 to a really smooth $5 a day with a 40-hour work week. Now, here comes the problem with his innovation for the employee, is what he used to say. His innovation for the employee proved to just be a ploy for him to control his employees. For instance, Ford actually would make his employees sign contracts to where they couldn't smoke, drink, do any of the fun things in the Roaring '20s. They couldn't do it. They weren't allowed because Ford made them sign a contract saying that if you're a Ford employee, you don't do these things. You can't misrepresent the company in any single way. He would actually have spies come in and watch his employees. Pretty crazy. Now, listen, Ford not being a great guy in history sort of gets overshadowed by his humanitarian work that he did for his company. For instance, Ford was the first automobile industry man to actually hire black individuals. Especially, he actually would put those black individuals in management positions, which was unheard of at the time. He would also have immigrants test for citizenship, and any of the immigrants that worked at his factory would be gained full citizenship by the Ford company. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, where did the Dodge and the Rolls-Royce come in? Well, the Dodge brothers actually started as a bicycle company called the Evans and Dodge Bicycle Company. The Dodge brothers moved to Detroit, Michigan in 1901, which was seen as the automobile industry of the world made by Henry Ford. It was a huge hotspot for cars, for engineers, for bright minds to all meet and work on cars. But they opened a shop on Boobin Street and started making bicycles and automobile parts. Then, in 1902, the Dodge brothers got a contract to build 3,000 transmissions for Olds Motor Works, and this proved themselves to everyone that they really knew what they were doing. They really knew a lot about the automobile industry. In 1903, Ford saw their incredible work that they did for the old motor industry, and he thought to himself, you know what, I'm really gonna need these guys to build my Model A to help me really launch my company. And so he hired them and made them sign a contract to start building engines for the Ford Motor Company, and made them quit their contract with the old Motor Works. Then, in 1910, the Dodge brothers built a car plant in Hamtramck, Michigan, and got inspiration for their very, very, very infamous Dodge Tourer. In 1920, they released their very infamous car, the Dodge Tourer, which moved exactly how you think. It moved just like a Ford because they worked with Ford all the time, but they modified the Ford. They took the Ford Model T's build. In fact, if you look up a picture of the Dodge Tourer, it looks exactly like a Ford Model T, except for one little thing. The Dodge Tourer had a significantly more powerful engine, therefore making it go longer distances or even go faster, had a higher horsepower, costed a little bit more, but it was amazing for hauling people. Now, the last two car companies I talked about were based on durability, based on cost effectiveness, based on the simple man. This next car company, they're for the high life guys. Stemming from the high life, you'd expect a esteemed individual to make the company. So, it all started with Charles Stewart Rolls, who in 1903 broke the world land speed record in Dublin, driving a 30 horsepower car at nearly 83 miles per hour. And later on, to fund his racing, he started to make car dealerships with his friend Claude Johnson, who would prove to be extremely important later in his life. And they called it the C.S. Rolls and Company. Henry Royce, who is the other part of Rolls-Royce, was a very esteemed engineer who was extremely obsessed with cars. And he met Charles Rolls in 1904 when Rolls saw his twin-cylinder 10 horsepower car that Royce actually made himself. He was like I said, a very good engineer, made his own cars. And after driving Royce's car, he agreed to start selling as many cars as Royce could make. And that sort of formed the partnership that we all know today. And after several promotions of the world's most reliable car, as they'd say, the esteemed 40 to 50 horsepower Rolls-Royce car began to sell, and it started to have the tag of the luxury car. Claude Johnson actually ended up promoting the car to be for the esteemed gentleman, for the smart man, for the intelligent man, for the businessman. He made all these slogans so that way richer people would buy their cars, would buy their high cars, because he would also not just say it's for the esteemed gentleman. He would comment constantly on the perfection of the engineering of the car, the perfection of the craft making, of the seats, of the lights, of every feature of the car was perfect, detailed, rich, amazing. He did this on purpose, and it turned out to really work. Rolls-Royce really took off and started to become the luxury, to show the businessman, the corporation founders, and most of all, the bootleggers of the 1920s. Well, that's all you need to know about the three car companies that ended up ruling the 1920s. Ended up honestly ruling further than that. If Ford had a huge stake in everything, Dodge did too. Rolls-Royce dropped off a bit, but they're still a very luxury car. But yeah, that's about it. Let me know if you liked the video, and bye.